Yo, welcome to Youbbuteo, your favourite place for Subbuteo, and welcome to the video that I've been promising for God knows how long, but we are finally there. This is episode 101, which is like well out of order, but because it's 101 facts about Subbuteo. Make sure if Subbuteo's your thing, old football's your thing, toys your thing, hit that subscribe button, give me thumbs up, drop me comments, drop your facts about Subbuteo in the comments, and that'll do. No more rambling from me. Let's hand over to your narrator, some AI guy that I managed to give all these facts to and he's spitting them all out. That'll do from me. On with the facts, finally!
Subbuteo was launched in March 1947. It was invented, manufactured and solely distributed by Peter Adolph from his base in Langton Green. He adapted his game from Youbbuteo, a table football game that had been invented in 1929 by William Lane Keeling of Liverpool. The original prototype for Subbuteo was a button from Woolworths. He wanted to call the game Hobby, but couldn't get the trademark. So he went with Subbuteo instead. Subbuteo is derived from the Neo-Latin scientific name Falco subbutea, which is a bird of prey known as the Eurasian hobby. Rumor has it Peter's friend Ernie Sharp helped with the initial work on the game. Mr. Adolph offered to go into partnership with Mr. Sharp, but his friend decided the game would never catch on, and declined. There were no hard feelings though, as Mr. Sharp's grandson had a house full of Subbuteo as a child. The August 1946 edition of the Boy's Own paper first announced Subbuteo's availability and offered to send details, but sets were not available until March 1947. According to rumors, after the early adverts, orders started to pour in as Adolph set about converting his idea into a deliverable product. The first sets did not contain a pitch, just a piece of chalk and advice on how to create a pitch on an old army blanket. The original game detailed a curved shooting line as opposed to the straight one we all know. There were originally only 10 teams produced. The first Subbuteo association was called the Table Soccer Players Association, the TSPA. The TSPA still exists today. The first players were produced on cardboard and had to be cut out by hand and inserted in the base. The team range increased to 24 in 1949 and then to 36 by 1956. Subbuteo would create over 2,000 confirmed team kits in its history. Manchester United have the most referenced kits. Subbuteo also created sports games including cricket and rugby, where teams could also be purchased separately. They also produced hockey, speedway, and fishing. With football, Subbuteo also created multiple five-a-side games and even an indoor version. They would also create other space games called Journey into Space and By Spacecraft to the Moon. In the 80s, Subbuteo would also sell kites under the name Dunford. In the 1950s, similar to old cigarette cards, Subbuteo would also produce a series of famous footballer cards which were given with teams and accessories. Oddly, the Subbuteo catalogs of the time never mentioned them. In the early 1960s, Subbuteo started to produce the now legendary three-dimensional 00 scale figures. The patent maker for the figure was Charles Stadden, who also designed the drivers in 1970s Scalextrics, and also worked for Triang, Corgi and Meccano. For Subbuteo, Mr. Stadden not only did the pattern for the heavyweight, but he also did the cricketers, spectators, the first 3 cups Subbuteo released, Jules Rimet, European Championship, and FA Cup, and more. Also, Subbuteo's plastic molding firm made the drivers for Scalextric in the 1960s. Subbuteo did not produce black or different ethnicity players until 1966. Even then, in an age of limited information and black and white photography, Subbuteo treated Pell and his famous teammates such as Garrincha, Didi and Jairzinho, not only as the norm for Brazil, but for the whole of South American football, meaning all players were painted with black skin. So for the releases of Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay and Chile, Subbuteo's painters were instructed to use the brown paint usually reserved for hair and boots to produce the first black teams. Of course, it was not very accurate and has been pointed out, for instance, that Chile had no black players at this time. It was not until the early 90s that Subbuteo started distributing English teams with both mixed and ethnic players. The French teams of the 70s, however, did include 2 black players, and you could purchase a West Indies cricket team who were also painted black. There is an urban legend surrounding Clyde Best, who played for West Ham in the 70s. When the Subbuteo collecting pioneers started pooling their knowledge in the late 1990s, it seemed that everyone had acquired, or at least seen, an early 1970s West Ham United team with a single player painted with black skin. Was this done by Subbuteo employees? Did the housewives of Kent paint Clyde Best? As time has gone on, and hundreds of teams have passed through eBay, the answer to this question seems, sadly, to be no. The Clyde Best question has faded away. As mentioned before, Subbuteo there was a very similar game. called New Footy, created in 1928. During the 1950 the games were bitter rivals, with New Footy advertising itself as the original game. In the 1960s, after the New Footy parent company folded, all stock was purchased by Subbuteo. There is an urban myth that Peter Adolph had a fire at the New Footy factory to burn all the old stock. It might be tied into an apparent clear-up at Subbuteo's factory, where they destroyed their own old 1950s stock that they were no longer selling, such as the space and racing games. Subbuteo has always been sold around the world. In Brazil it was called Pelable and would not come with the standard red and blue teams, but all white for Santos and red and black for Flamengo. The first ever women's Subbuteo set was created in 2018 and given away at the Women's FA Cup 2018 to competition winners, and is now entirely sought after by collectors. The first commercially available women's set was the England Lionesses set in 2021, released alongside a single Women's England team box. The only other women's teams are sold in Portugal as the Women's Portugal home and away team. The Beatles were produced as Subbuteo figures. The story goes that Peter met them early in their career, and got the deal before they'd become famous. The first advert also states that this is number 1 in the series, but no other scale pop stars seem to have been produced. While the Beatles may have been produced by Subbuteo, they never had a team. That honor goes to the band The Farm as the only non-football team to be created in Subbuteo. Other famous people to made in Subbuteo include Frank Sidebottom, Liam Gallagher and Damon Albarn in the Pretty Green Subbuteo set, Queen Elizabeth II in the VIP presentation pack, and self-proclaimed England mascot Ken Bailey. Fictional side Milchester United were also featured in most of their men's kits, with each featuring a blonde Roy of the Rovers. Subbuteo itself had a real football team that played out of a factory in Spain. They produced the kit in Subbuteo, Ref 60. When Waddingtons purchased Subbuteo in 1968, Subbuteo was valued at around £250,000, which is nearly £4 million today. During the peak of production, Subbuteo used 10 million washers every 3 months in the bases of players. Up to 4,000 players were assembled weekly by outworkers, who were generally housewives of the local area in Tunbridge Wells. Up to 1,000 players were painted every week by each outworker. Outworkers were paid on average £7.50 per week, which works out to be around £80 when adjusted for inflation. Typical they could paint, on average, 28 figures an hour. In 1979 Subbuteo started to machine print team figures and began to move away from the hand-painted player. The first Subbuteo price guide was produced in 1947. The last Subbuteo price list was produced as a catalogue, poster, in 1996. While Subbuteo has made accessories from floodlights to VAR sets, unofficially you can even buy a streaker set followed by police with its own rules. Subbuteo were notorious for getting kits wrong. For example, River Plate was painted with a red band instead of the famous sash, while Santos, who play in white, was painted in green and yellow in England. There are 3 theories on how they got it wrong. First, Peter Adolph saw them playing while in Brazil and they were playing in their away kit. 2. There is a little known Santos team who play in Brazil, Associação Atlética Portuguesa Santos, and play in green. And 3. It was done to represent Brazil, as Subbuteo already did an all-white kit for Leeds and Real Madrid. The rarest Subbuteo team is said to be San Benedettese, who play in Italy's third-tier Serie C. Subbuteo Stadium can hold around 7,500 little plastic fans. The main Subbuteo factory in the 70s was at Warwick Park, which is now a 5-star hotel and has a plaque to depict its history. Subbuteo was purchased by Hasbro from Waddingtons in 1994 in a deal worth £57 million. The deal contained other games including Cluedo, Monopoly and others. After selling Subbuteo to Waddingtons, Peter A. created a new game called Aquila. It had a very similar look to Subbuteo. He also tried to create a baseball game called Atlantica Mini Baseball. In 1982 there were estimated to be 7 million Subbuteo players worldwide. In 1989 Subbuteo won Toy of the Year. The first Subbuteo World Cup was played in 1970 and was played every 4 years in a FIFA World Cup year. In 1990 the World Cup was shown on Channel 4. It was so popular that in 1992 there was an attempt to make it an Olympic sport, and it is currently recognized in Malta by the Maltese Olympic Committee as sports table football. In 1994 there were 2 World Cups, one organized by Waddingtons as with the previous World Cups in the USA and another by FISTF in Paris. In 2024 Tunbridge Wells, the home of Subbuteo, will host the 2024 FISTF World Cup. The first World Cup winner was Peter Zarkowski of West Germany in 1970. The current champion is Luca Colangelo of Italy in the open category. Currently, 11 different nationalities make up the top 50 players in the world. In 1970 15-year-old Andrea Picluga had his finger insured for £25,000. As the reigning world champion, He would tour England in 19 towns and cities accepting challenges and giving demonstrations of the game. Later on in 1987 Subbuteo again insured a player's finger, insuring Justin Finch's finger for £160,000. Subbuteo was being made into many computer games in 8-bit era, being playable on the Commodore, Amiga, Amstrad and Spectrum. Subbuteo was also later created on the Nintendo DS. While Subbuteo may have seen its demise by video games, John Hare, the maker of the 90s game Sensible Soccer, was inspired by Subbuteo to make the game. He says, when I was a child I played a lot of Subbuteo. I would set it all up ready for when my dad came back from work and say, "Dad, can we play Subbuteo now?" To me, SWAS was an electronic version of Subbuteo, but you could play against the computer, so on your own. And, as a child, when I wanted to play with my dad and when he wasn't there or not home from work I couldn't play against anyone. The TV program Playing for Real was based on Subbuteo. When her father dies, Chrissy Buchan inherits the position of manager of Real Falkirk, his Subbuteo football team. While Chrissy is determined to follow in the footsteps of her father Billy the Bill Shankly of table football, new player manager Sam Montgomery is a dyed-in-the-wool misogynist who will stop at nothing to stop Chrissy. Sam even hides Billy's best player, Charlie Nicholas, in an attempt to thwart Chrissy. Subbuteo was used for basis of the UEFA Champions League branding we see today. The team behind the original branding had no CGI, and the team couldn't go to a stadium and mock up ideas, but Keith Young, who headed the team, remembered he had given his son his old Subbuteo set along with stands and other stadium accessories. This would become the way he and his team developed the brand to see how it might work. They would mock it up on a Subbuteo stadium. Subbuteo has featured in many songs. Firstly, My Perfect Cousin by the Undertones, who feature a Subbuteo figure on the cover. Subbuteo was also discussed in Half Man Half Biscuits' All I Want for Christmas is a Dukla Prague Away kit. World in Motion had a remix called the Subbuteo Mix. The Farm featured a Subbuteo soldier on their cover for the single All Together Now. Other songs related to Subbuteo include Admiral Fellows Subbuteo, Sonichi N's Teenage Winter, Massive Attack's 5-Man Army, and JME's Subbuteo. In 1973 Subbuteo even released its own record called The Sound of Subbuteo, featuring fan noise and a Subbuteo football song written by Frank Burton and accompanied by Wildhurst School Silver Band. Famous Subbuteo collectors include Gian Luigi Buffon, who is said to have around 500 teams in this collection. Ashley Williams, the former Wales captain, was a keen Subbuteo player as a child. Ashley was not happy there were no black players and so could not replicate his hero John Barnes. He later said to Wales Online, "Yes, it is true that I wrote to the company that makes Subbute," said Williams. "I don't really remember too much about it, but I asked my mum why there were no black players in my England teams. My mum thought it was a good question, so we sent in a letter. I didn't stand on a mountain shouting about it. I was just a kid asking a question, but they changed it. They introduced black players, and they also sent me a load of Subbuteo stuff." Was it Ashley's letter that made them change? Dennis Law also played Subbuteo as a child, having a picture of him in his biography accepting a Subbuteo trophy. Bill Shankly was once the Subbuteo club president. After his death he was then succeeded by Bobby Charlton. Antonio Conte uses Subbuteo for tactics and is confirmed to have used Astro-based Subbuteo tables at Tottenham. Conte says, "I use Subbuteo to study and sometimes to explain some tactical situations to my players. I am at home with this." England's under-17s team used a full-sized Subbuteo pitch with players for tactical analysis before and during games at the 2017 World Cup, which they ended up winning. In 2010 a regional daily newspaper found a new way around a ban on photographers imposed by Southampton Football Club, by using Subbuteo figures to recreate a match. Southampton brought in the controversial ban on press photographers at its ground, saying newspapers should instead pay for images taken by its own professionals. But regional papers have refused to buy the club's photos and many have found alternative ways of covering the game. Anthony Marshall, chief sports writer at the Swindon Advertiser, came up with the idea of using Subbuteo to recreate key moments from the game. He spent time yesterday painting the plastic football players so they were in the correct colors and setting up a pitch in the office. Subbuteo has touched the lives of millions of people worldwide, whether people are collecting, playing, painting, building stadiums or arranging associations. Millions of people have made friendships and enjoyed experiences they could have never imagined, all simply by flicking to kick.
And there you go, 101 facts about Subbuteo. Let me know you're on down in the comments. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. Come back to the channel, loads of Subbuteo stuff going on here. Hit the subscribe button, give me thumbs up. Come see me on all the social channels, and I will see you very soon as we get back to doing what we do best on this channel, and that's talking Subbuteo all the time. Until then, you know it, keep on flicking